next, you won't believe what's going to happen.
It's time for the PowerShell Podcast, the podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick. And now, here's your host, Andrew Plaw.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Plaw at Andrew Plaw Tech, and I'm still at PowerShell Saturday, North Carolina, in lovely Raleigh at the Align Technologies headquarters. I don't know if it's Align Technologies, it's just Align. I don't know. We're somewhere, and it's beautiful here. The coffee machines are bubbling, and I'm joined with returning guest. I don't know how many times you've been on, but you got recognized.
I did.
Based on your voice at this conference.
Yeah.
But welcome to the podcast, Frank Lesniak.
Thank you. Yeah, this is my third one. In less than a year, too, which is
Come on, man.
Yeah.
Judd, watch out.
Well, we keep hanging out. We keep hanging out. It's a good time.
You keep going to good spots, I'll be there. So
likewise.
I'm glad that we coordinated on this one a little bit and we're able to meet up here. But welcome to the pod. Welcome to North Carolina. You been here before?
North Carolina?
Yeah.
I was in North Carolina, in Raleigh actually once, in the Research Triangle once for cybersecurity incident recovery.
Oh.
So,
but not the Research Triangle PowerShell user group, just the area.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Yeah, RTP Sug, shout out. Awesome group there. But you have given, I think, a few presentations today. I think you led the charge on one, kind of were a helper in a few others. But What have you been up to today?
So started off the day, Blake presented. You interviewed him earlier.
Blake Cherry, shout out.
Yep. I co-presented with him on basically using the Redfish protocol, managing physical servers and physical infrastructure with PowerShell, which is, you know me, Andrew. I like interesting use cases for PowerShell, and I just think that is such an interesting use case. So anyway, so Blake did that presentation, and I co-piloted that with him. And then I led the presentation on cross-platform PowerShell, which I use that term loosely to mean not only deviating from Windows and managing or running PowerShell on Linux and Mac OS, but also cross CPU architecture. And a bit of backward compatibility too, because I think that's also very interesting and very related. So that was my talk. Danny Stutz co-presented that with me. And then we wrapped up with Danny Stutz leading a AI-oriented talk on basically unstructured data classification, which that's a lot of words. Taking text data, which is inherently loose, unstructured information, and organizing it, auto-categorizing it, and presenting the results. And so I co-piloted that with Danny.
Nice. Well, I definitely want to dive into some cross-platform PowerShell because I'm also an aficionado. I'm actually a Mac user, so I'm always on that cross-platform these days.
Yeah, I love that.
But how did you initially come across that as a topic idea, and where did it come across your radar?
So I've been following the cross-platform journey, I guess, with PowerShell pretty closely. I was super stoked when PowerShell Core 6 dropped in 2018 and started messing with it right away. Honestly, I had never used. Well, that's not true. I barely used Mac OS at that point. So I got myself a Mac Mini to start messing with that. Been doing a bunch of different Linux stuff, mostly Raspberry Pi, but other stuff as well. So I've dabbled a bit, and I just was pretty excited to be able to use PowerShell on those platforms. So ever since the start of the journey, I liked it a lot. I did a small talk at the Chicago, which is sort of on pause with the Chicago PowerShell user group. We did a virtual meetup. I did a talk on cross-platform PowerShell. So this was kind of a bit of a extension of that talk and certainly a huge refinement of that talk.
Nice. I think that there's some people who are listening to our podcast who've only discovered PowerShell after 7 was out, but it is such a big deal that when PowerShell was made open source and cross-platform, when PowerShell Core came out, that was a huge step. I mean, can you imagine being in the shoes of, it's only Windows PowerShell. There's a lot of maybe naysayers who could say, hey, I'm not on that. But nowadays we have access to be able to use it on your Mac, on your Linux, on your Raspberry Pi. Hey, Any other interesting devices you can think of that can run PowerShell?
Well, it depends on what you mean by interesting, and depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to me, I love exotic hardware. So you can run PowerShell on Itanium systems, which are defunct at this point. You shouldn't be using that at this point, but those are still around probably at some companies running Unix and the like. You can put Windows on those things. I think that was Proto VM and run PowerShell there. You can put it on. You mentioned Raspberry Pi, but today I showed a Windows 10 IoT Core operating system, so it was running Windows on the Raspberry Pi, and we had PowerShell running on that too, which is kind of interesting.
That is wild. It's a crazy world that we live in, that we can run PowerShell in all these places, and you can have the same tool set that you're refining. You're working on your PowerShell, you're getting good at it. Well, guess what? You can run it in a whole bunch of different spots.
Yep.
You mentioned Itanium. That was your use case for like PowerShell 1, V1, V2, right?
It was yeah, that was a use case. It's not the only one. Actually, I kind of joked earlier that I have to maintain code for PowerShell version 1. That's actually true. We have so we do a lot of work with mergers and acquisitions and divestitures and integrations.
Yep.
And especially for divestitures, we get in there and we well, let me put it this way: when we do a project, there's always like a kind of a fixed set of phases to any project, right? Discovery, planning or design, implementation, migration, cutover, whatever, right? Like every project kind of follows a sequence like that. Well, discovery is arguably the most important of those phases, but nobody wants to pay for it. You got to get it done quickly. And I've learned over the years, you never want to just take somebody's word for it. Like, hey, how many mailboxes do you have? 200? Great. Let's move on to the next question. No, you always got to get an inventory if possible. So long-winded way of saying, I have a script that pulls a lot of information out of Microsoft Exchange, all metadata, no mailbox, no mail items, but like all the metadata for Exchange mailboxes, extracts that out, and the script I wrote works all the way back to Exchange 2007. And that's intentional because, I hope nobody's running that at this point. It's way out of support, but we just don't know what we're going to run into.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure that no matter what situation the client is in, we can support them and get the information we need and get them off that platform quickly.
As a consultant, yeah, you want to be writing tools that are adaptable, and you don't want to have to rewrite it whenever you do encounter that Exchange 2007 box.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, I try not to write very much PowerShell version 1. Some of the foundational stuff I do, I make that backward compatible, but most of the stuff I don't do that with. Honestly, like PowerShell version 1, the error handling is terrible. It's very limited. You can't do try-catch, to be very specific. So that really limits your options. You have to use a trap block, and it's ugly.
Yikes. What are some of the biggest improvements that you've seen from V1 to now? Is it just the try-catch stuff? Are there other helpful things that you have access to now?
Well, if I had to pick one thing, it would be try-catch. And that came out in version 2, so like I'm barely answering your question with that answer, but like that's the kind of thing where like you look back and you're like, why wasn't that in the first release of Power? Like the error handling is just awful. So like I think actually VB Script's error handling was better, which is sad to say. But anyway, so that to me was like so clutch and so fundamental that that's probably the thing I most celebrate. But other than that, I think just the ability to install and manipulate modules, which came out a bit later.
Yeah, they were snap-ins, I think, back in the day.
Well, you could load modules, I think, in V3, I want to say, but it wasn't like there was no like add module. You had to like download the module manually and like stage it manually, So like the whole concept of like package management that got added later is probably the other biggest game changer.
Nice. And in your personal, do you have like a home lab?
I do. It's not that crazy.
You're not Blake.
I'm not on Blake Cherry's level. No, I've got some like domain controllers and stuff. Just so I've got hybrid identity running, some older file servers that are pretty much deprecated, but I keep them around for like some older data that I don't have uploaded to the cloud. And then I've got some stuff in Azure. Nothing too crazy though.
Okay. And Azure, I think, is another good use case for the whole cross-platform thing. I think you guys covered Cloud Shell a little bit.
Yeah, we did. Cloud Shell was like, like before cross-platform PowerShell was a thing, Cloud Shell was the only way to really run PowerShell on a non-Windows system. And so you literally go to the Azure portal, click the little PowerShell button, and you get it. Well, at that time, it was a container running on Windows. So it took like a hot minute to spin up, but you got yourself a PowerShell prompt up in the cloud, which is kind of neat.
I think Cloud Shell is super sick. It's freaking awesome.
I think it's very underrated. I agree.
Oh, for sure. I mean, the fact that you can have your own kind of instance with access to all your stuff right there, ready to go, is pretty sweet. And maybe the mobile phone kind of thing is pretty cool too. You can access it from your mobile device and do things that you need to do. I always have the thought of just, I want to be sitting on the beach somewhere and be able to do my job if things pop off. Kind of provides you that a little bit. I mean, I don't really want to type PowerShell through a cell phone keyboard, but it's there if you need it.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you need to do something quick, it's a good option.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Have you played around with it outside of just the fact that it exists? You ever use it?
What, Cloud
Shell? Yeah.
Yeah, for some administrative tasks. A lot of times the actual real use case I have for that is like I'm in a restricted client environment and they're like crazy about how you can authenticate to their tenant and they're not issuing me a computer. So they're having me work in like VDI or something like that. And it's like, man, like maybe I can get to the Azure portal. Oh, good, I can get to the Azure portal. Okay, great. Well, rather than like triple RDP hopping to some jump host, let me see if I can fire up CloudHost. Oh, that works. Okay, cool. Well, I can do my stuff here.
Yeah.
So I've done that a couple of times.
Okay, cool. That's
Yeah.
that's a pretty good use case.
Yeah. I like the ability also to pull down like a Cloud Shell container. I know I showed that earlier in our talk, and it actually failed because I was on an ARM64 device, and the Cloud Shell container is written for Intel x64, AMD's 64-bit. So it didn't quite work, but in general, that's a really cool, I think, use case that you can have this container that is as up to date as you want it to be, and pretty much can always have the latest and greatest tools without you having to like update your modules and things like that. By the way, that's a whole nother talk track, conference talk idea is like a module to update modules or functions to update your modules automatically, like Windows Update for PowerShell kind of thing.
Right.
So
Yeah, I think most people have out-of-date modules installed and they have no clue.
dude, guarantee it. And there's sometimes legitimate reasons for that, like the PNP module for SharePoint. That thing gets updated with breaking changes a lot. And I'm not saying that's bad. Like they're moving the ball forward, which is good, but like I've had that present some serious challenges to some projects. So I can understand like sometimes you don't want your stuff up to date, but most of the time you do.
Are you doing anything with Raspberry Pis? I think you mentioned it in a talk you gave at MMS MOA about the airplane sensor things.
Yeah. So I did. I built a passive aircraft radar using Raspberry Pi. So what that means is you basically hook up a software-defined radio. It's literally a radio that can receive signals. But using software, you can tune the radio to a certain frequency. And if you do that and you hook up the right antenna, you can receive aircraft transponder transmissions, which lets you plot aircraft on a map. And so you kind of get like an aircraft radar style view of all the aircraft in the area. And what's pretty neat about that, I mean, it's neat in and of itself, I guess, but what's crazy is with like a modest antenna, and like you don't even really need line of sight. Like the antenna doesn't need to be 1,000 feet in the air or anything like that. You can pick up aircraft that are like 200 miles away, which is crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I was like, okay, this guy, he likes some unique things. Are you still running around with that on your car?
I don't have it on my car, but if I go on a road trip somewhere, I will like bring it with, as long as I have room to do so. Which is just kind of fun. Because the one thing I did demonstrate at MMS was I had a GPS hooked up to it. You may remember this, but like I had the GPS feeding the flight aware software to like change my position, because that software is in addition to receiving and like plotting what the aircraft transponder is saying about the aircraft's position, it also uses triangulation to figure out, okay, this person A, person B, person C, person D are all saying they found this aircraft, and with just like the speed of light or the speed of sound, I guess. No, speed of light, I guess, in this case. It takes a certain amount of time for those signals to go from the aircraft to the receiver. And that time, of course, so you got like these four different measurements of time elapsement, and you can use that to plot where the aircraft actually is. So it's important that you are like telling it accurately where your GPS position is.
Whew.
Yeah.
That's fun stuff, man. You definitely get in the weeds with some of that nerdy stuff, and I love it.
Yeah, dude. I mean, I have too many hobbies. I'm trying to do less, not more, but life's busy. So
do you have any non-technical hobbies that's kind of like your escape from the IT world?
So I don't know that it's fair to call it a hobby, but I'm on the board of a nonprofit that supports in Chicago in the suburbs. There's a open admission animal shelter.
Oh, nice.
Which if people support animal welfare, that's great. I'm in that camp for sure. So please do support your local animal shelter. But if you can, I would encourage you to look for a open admission animal shelter in your area. That means just what it sounds like. It means they will take any animal, regardless of the health of that animal, its behavior, its adoptability, all that stuff. And so we're lucky to have a open admission animal shelter near me that is so well run. We have such great leadership there. Dr. Hannock, who's the lead veterinarian, is one of the most amazing human beings I've ever met. Anyway, so I'm on the board of the nonprofit that supports that animal shelter. And so I wouldn't call that a hobby, but it is very fulfilling and a fun at times thing to do.
It sort of is a hobby of sorts.
Yeah, I mean, it's a time investment, right? So it's got to be something you enjoy, and it is. So, and we're building a new animal shelter. So I guess shameless plug if anybody is interested in donating. We're literally in the middle of building a new animal shelter right now.
Nice.
So,
Do you have a link? Maybe share me a link.
Yeah, I can send you a link to it. Yeah.
Sweet. Well, I'll donate a little bit.
Absolutely, man. That's
that's
awesome.
great to see, because I think we have a problem where I live with people kind of leaving their animals on the side of the road kind of thing.
Yeah,
which is,
yeah, that happens. Yeah, absolutely. And so they run this animal shelter, because it's a county animal shelter. But it's not tax funded. That's the other kind of interesting thing. A lot of people don't understand that, but they get their funding from rabies tags, which I guess is a tax, but it's not property tax, which is what most people think about. So it's rabies tags, and then also like fines and fees. So adoption fees or fines in the case of, animal mistreatment, and they have to confiscate animals and things like that. So that's how they kind of run their operations. But then there's the donor dollars. So like, a dog comes in. Actually, this happened recently. A dog came in and it needed $7,500 in heart surgery because it had a congenital heart disease or heart defect. And so anyway, so we funded that through donor dollars.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's
People
cool.
answer the call, man, when you make it. Right?
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's great stuff.
Yeah.
Well, a little bit of a pivot back to the PowerShell world.
Yeah, absolutely.
I noticed in your talk about cross-platform PowerShell that you shared a PS script analyzer file.
Yeah.
How did you determine? I think one of the things it did was show you commands that aren't available on cross-platform. I guess Get Computer Info was one that I think was highlighted in the talk.
Yep.
How did you go about making that? Or do you just have like a list of all the commands that don't work everywhere? Or
no? So this is something that's actually built into PS Script Analyzer. It is documented, but it's not very well known. Honestly, when PS Script Analyzer launched, or maybe when I started using VS Code, I guess maybe those are one and the same or pretty close. I read the FN manual, RTFM, and I saw this. Wait a minute, there's all this functionality that they built, and maybe this is like slightly after the launch, but it's been out there for a while. I saw all this functionality for evaluating cross-platform, backward compatibility, all these things that are like near and dear to my PowerShell heart.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you know what? This is awesome. Let me turn this stuff on. And so I played with the settings, got them working, and I'm like, this is freaking great. Now there are some warnings and things I ignore. There's also some that are annoying, like for example, if I'm writing a backward compatible script, right? If you write get WMI object, it flags a warning and says, hey, this is deprecated. You should use get sim instance, right?
But
which makes sense. We all know that, right? If you write PowerShell, you probably know that. So great, I want to use get sim instance. Well, if you do that, then it flags another warning saying, hey, this is not available on PowerShell 3, I think.
Yeah,
I think this is the cutoff. So on my code, pretty much universally, if I'm running backward compatible code, I have to do I get the version of PowerShell, and then I have an if statement. If it's version 4 and above, I think, use get sim instance. Otherwise, use get WMI object. And again, it's throwing yellow lines on all this stuff, but it's like, whatever, I know that's
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
I handled it.
Yeah.
I got an if statement in front of it, so it's fine.
That's cool. I'll have a link to, I guess, that PowerShell script analyzer file in the show notes of this episode, because that's pretty cool. I didn't know that it had that functionality.
Yeah, it does. And this is in my talk in the slides, but just to kind of voice it over, what you want to do is download that file, store it somewhere, ideally on your OneDrive if you use OneDrive, like in your documents or something somewhere. And then in VS Code, if you search for PS Script AN, I think, not analyzer, but PS Script analysis or something. I'd have to double check, but anyway, you search for that. If you find the setting, and then in this like text box in the settings in VS Code, you can give it the path to that file. And if it's in your OneDrive and it roams with you, it'll stick with you if you get on a new computer and stuff, which is kind of nice.
Do you ever play with the .github folder, or the .vs code folder?
I have a little bit, but I don't really mess with it that much.
Okay, I think there may be an opportunity for you to provide this through some way through the .vs code folder.
That's the folder that roams with you, right? Like the roaming settings?
That is the folder that if it's open, so say you open up a project folder for a repo and there's a .vs code folder, VS Code will be informed of all the settings.
That's right.
Things like
that's
that.
Right. Yeah, I've actually customized that recently because this is my VS Code pro tip of the day, other than the one I just gave, I guess. There's a setting you can turn on in that folder. You can drop that folder into your repo and drop a bit of JSON that basically says, hey, like when I hover over the window on Windows, I guess probably Mac does something similar. When I hover over the VS Code window, instead of showing me the currently open script file name, show me the name of the repository that's open in this like window. Because I usually have like between 4 and like 8 repos open.
Right.
And like trying to mouse over all these and figure out which one is the right one. Like I waste like 30 seconds every time I have to switch.
That's
contexts.
A niche pro tip right there.
I know, but it's one of these things that was driving me crazy.
Yeah.
So I just recently put that in place and I'm like, dude, this is great.
Yeah, the .github or the .vs code folder is sweet. I recommend if you have I think I was talking to Danny about the PowerShell groups, maybe coming up with a .vs code folder that sort of works for your org. You can share it, have it as like part of your template for new repos so that people who are new to your team can like use the same formatting, same whatever kind of things you've decided
Code
are worth
style.
it.
Yeah.
Recommend certain plugins for them. Things like that can be pretty helpful. So there you go. We're dropping pro tips.
I love that.
all right?
Yeah,
if
that's
you're
great.
listening, you're getting some good stuff.
And that overrides your local settings, right?
As long as the folder's open, yeah, I believe
Yeah.
so.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's good stuff there. Anything you can do to reduce hurdles and make things easier is always a win. And it seems like in this day and age, there's a lot of tools and things that make that sort of workflow easier. Speaking about making workflows easier, I'm curious to hear about your usage of AI. I know that you did the whole data science talk, which is kind of a niche use case, but what about your kind of daily workflow when you're going through what you're doing? Recently, I used it for some budget requests, which that's a newer thing to me. I haven't been in like a budgety position, but I had a request for some budget and they wanted it. So I was like, I don't know what to say. So I got a nice little template from AI, but how are you using it?
So I use it, well, in a few ways. I guess one is kind of the ChatGPT use case. So I have a subscription to ChatGPT, which I use for a lot of stuff. But for work, we have an Azure OpenAI instance, which is basically a private. For those that don't know, it's a private ChatGPT, meaning any data you submit is not used to train the public OpenAI instances.
And
so
you host it in your Azure kind of thing?
It's hosted in my company's Azure tenant. That's right. Yeah. And now the thing to know about that is you can spin that up, and that's great. All it does is give you APIs. So it doesn't give you the chat interface, like the UI. So my company has built the UI interface on top of that, which is we call it Nigel, but it's got all the same features of ChatGPT. It's just a private instance. So I'll give you an example. We have we do quarterly reviews, which I'll kind of save my comments about that. I'm not a huge like paperwork
quarterly,
person.
yeah.
But anyways, for those, it's quite the prompt, quite the set of prompts. But I've automated probably 80% of that process using. We use Nigel, of course, for that. But yeah, using some prompts and a bunch of input.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's really cool that the AI stuff, ChatGPT and interfaces are cool, but also the fact that there's the API capability and you can interact with it in different ways to leverage the results in some automations or scripts or whatever you have going on is pretty sweet.
Absolutely. We have a few different GPTs too. There's one for summarizing meeting notes. So like the biggest like AI use case, this is kind of silly, but like, so you have a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, right? You get the transcript. We've got a GPT where you can submit that transcript and it will summarize the meeting notes for you, and then like summarize all the action items.
Right.
So like you should still take notes, absolutely, but like this is a great way to augment that kind of BA role for like if you're the note taker in a meeting and you want to make sure you don't miss any action items. Like it's a great way to just kind of confirm that you got everything covered.
That's a great use case. I've also seen some people who have maybe some coworkers who write really rather long emails that are maybe a little bit too long, using it to summarize and what do I need to actually act on? What are the key points kind of thing? Yes. Obviously, you want to sanity check it with anything that's important.
I'm ashamed to admit that, but I've used that a couple times like that. Yeah.
No hate from me.
Yeah, man.
Efficiency.
Yeah. The other, actually one fun use case that I use probably once or twice a week is if you've in public ChatGPT, there's a GPT called Coloring Book Hero. You familiar with this? No,
not at all.
Okay, so if it's good if you got kids. So you basically you can pick the GPT Coloring Book Hero. It's an OpenAI GPT, so it's an official one. When you're in there, it gives you a prompt and you say, draw me a silly looking unicorn who's sitting on the toilet or something like that. Like whatever. I'm just like making up something silly, and it will draw a black and white. With like thick black lines, coloring book style page of whatever it is you prompted it with.
Texting my wife, hold on.
I mean, seriously, I almost feel bad for like coloring book publishers because like this, my daughter wants to color something. I'm like, what do you want to color? She tells me, I prompt it, it generates it. I might, refine it a little bit, but then I print it out and she colors it. So it's great.
And is that available through ChatGPT?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yep. Cool. And is it on the free models or you got to pay for that?
I think it's free.
That's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
I noticed that you use some AI imagery to get around copyright stuff.
I did. Yeah. Absolutely.
That common meme from Toy Story where it's like Buzz Lightyear and
with his arm around
Woody, yeah. Pointing her, yeah. I liked your rendition of that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm publishing the slides, so I didn't want to, I don't want Disney knocking on my door.
That's right.
Much love for Disney, but I don't need to get in legal trouble.
Good to avoid that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that transcription stuff is pretty sweet. It's cool to see it kind of work its way into different tools like that.
Yeah.
And just that space in general is just so interesting to watch.
Yeah. The other big use case that I have used is for our private instance that we use at work. We can attach documents, like large documents, and have it analyze them for whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's all kinds of things you can ask it, but like if we get, if we're doing a project and we're doing discovery, right, and we get a bunch of inventory data, maybe we want it to summarize something based on the data that's been provided. So now you got to be careful because OpenAI is not very good with numbers. So I would not ask it to count something and give you an accurate count. It might be directionally correct, but it's not going to be like literal. So just be a little careful with that. But anything like that's analyzing tables, forget it. I would not do that.
Have you done the whole how many R's are there in strawberry?
I've not personally done it, but I've seen the memes about that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I can't get one to, I say bold all the R's and it doesn't do it right anytime. I've tried a bunch of different models.
Well, it just can't because it's tokenizing the letters. And
Yeah.
so it doesn't have a concept of like really what is an R.
Yeah.
So it's weird.
But it's a good way to sort of demystify it for people who maybe aren't as experienced in tech or maybe not in tech at all, to say like, hey, this isn't just some magical thinking brain. It is science in the background. There are some limitations and challenges that can come with it.
Yep.
Maybe quench some of their concerns about it taking over the world. That I think those jokes were a lot more prevalent when it first happened. I think they've kind of died down from what I've seen.
Yeah, I think it's still very much near the top of the hype curve, but maybe we're just over that first peak. And I think it's going to continue, but I'm not saying it's crashing or anything, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Just
Yep.
the typical hype cycle stuff.
I gave this opportunity. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I gave this opportunity to Danny, and I want to extend it to you as well.
Okay.
People are out there listening. They're enjoying the Frank 5. Can you inspire the people out there? What's your message to those that are out there listening right now?
So I know this is maybe a little bit silly, but the one thing that, because I get asked like, hey, Frank, how did you do whatever? How are you so good at something like this or what, whatever it is. And to me, it's like, well, just pay attention. Like, honestly, like I know it's a simple thing, but like whether it's listening to what the person's saying, taking notes, on what they're saying, reading the manual. I mentioned that earlier. Like these things make a big difference. And they're such a brilliant basic that candidly, most people aren't very good at or just don't spend the energy or time on. I think if you, like, I'll give you a specific example. Let's say you want to get into Microsoft security. You want to be like a security expert in the Microsoft space. I think if you had a week of, and I'm not saying you could literally do this for a week because you might go a little insane, but hypothetically, if you had a week to read all the Microsoft docs on zero trust security and how to secure this, that, and the other thing, and maybe a little bit of lab time as well, I think you would be a freaking rock star. If you have enough focus and time to really like study things like that, you could be a freaking expert or pretty close to an expert in that kind of time frame. And for whatever reason, whether it's lack of time or lack of interest or lack of attention, people don't do those things.
Yeah.
And therefore they sort of meander. So I think it's like, if you want to get into something, if you have a goal like that, clear the space, make sure you have the time, give yourself the time, and do yourself a favor and make sure you spend the energy on it. And I think you'll be surprised at how much that can pay dividends.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that's kind of coming up for me, which is find things you're interested in and pursue that, because it's going to be hard to put in that time if you're studying something where you don't see how you would actually use it or don't have actually any interest in it. Mm-hmm. But if you do, and I think another term that came was like, be present with what you're saying. It's like, be present when people are talking. If you're in a meeting wasting your time, don't waste your time. Be
don't
present
even join the
there.
meeting. Yeah,
exactly.
That's a big pet peeve of mine too. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I also think that you have a really good way of thinking of things from a high level. Like during your presentations, I can tell that you're keeping kind of the big message, and sometimes you'll go back and like reiterate certain things. I think that you're pretty skilled at that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I know people can get lost. Again, attention, right? Like you get an email, it distracts you for a second, and it's like, wait, hold on, what are we talking about? So yeah, sometimes you got to bring it back, make sure people are following. You don't want to lose the audience.
That's a good tip, man.
Yeah.
I feel like it's meant for me, so I'm taking it. Awesome. Well, Frank, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, dude.
People have been vibing. They've been digging it. Where can we find you on the World Wide Web? I know I've asked you this a few times.
No, it's all good, man. It's all good. So I'm on all the socials. I use X a lot or Twitter, just at Frank Lesniak.
Yep.
I'm on LinkedIn. I've been posting there about once a week or so as of about 6 months ago. So I'm a bit more active, but not as active as X and whatnot. I'm also on like Blue Sky. If X isn't your thing and you're not on Twitter, I'm on Blue Sky and then Mastodon too.
Awesome. Well, Frank, thank you. Let's enjoy the rest of this conference.
Dude, I'm looking forward to it.
Sweet. Thanks, everybody.
See ya.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Plot, at Andrew Plotek, live at PowerShell Saturday NC. And I am joined with first-time speaker, just right off the heels of your first presentation, which was awesome, by the way. I am joined by Neha Patil. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Andrew.
So, did you know that you're going to get asked to do the podcast as soon as you finished?
No.
You like how you finished doing a stressful thing only to then be like, hey, by the way, you want to do another stressful thing?
Yeah, I just figured that, while I'm in the zone of talking, I might as well talk more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great way to look at it.
After this, I'm going to go sit in a corner.
Exactly.
Yep.
Me too. I'm going to recuperate a little bit before dinner tonight, enjoy a couple more sessions. But I wanted to talk about what you talked about and introduce you to our community, because I know we teased this interview. I was saying, I hope I can get to interview you with the Phil Bossman interview. So happy to actually get to come full circle on that. But what was your presentation about?
My presentation was about automating emails the easiest way possible. And I did it using a module called Mailazor. It was made by Evotech and Jeffrey Steadfast. It's an amazing module. It lets you do a lot of things easily without using any of the code complexities, any HTML, CSS. It wraps it all up for you, and it makes it super easy to send emails.
I think if you've been using PowerShell for a while, you may have used Send Mail Message, which I think is now deprecated. And now you need to be using Microsoft Graph to kind of send mails or find some other method.
Yeah.
And this kind of uses the new way. It's the new approved way. And back in the past, whenever I was doing our user onboarding and creation and stuff, I wrote a nice little email to go out and reach out to their managers and to the new employee and all that. And HTML was what I had to come up with, which was a big challenge. And your presentation highlighted that you don't need to write the HTML yourself. You can leverage something like Mailazar to do all the hard work for you. You just got to write PowerShell, which if you're listening to this, you might know a thing or two. It's just parameters and values for those parameters, and you're able to get really cool emails.
Yep. You just want to send a simple email, right? It's not supposed to be a huge development task to automate emails. I remember the first time I was trying to automate emails, I was hoping that it would be a day's work at max. But then I had to do all this bunch of stuff, and then I found this module, and I was like, this is how easy it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And it has some cool features that you can leverage, like the colored of text. And what are some of the other things you showed in your talk that were some of the value adds from this module?
The most value added definitely was how easy it is to create tables. You just send in any kind of PS object to the email table option and you're done. That's like 2 or 3 words: email table, option, data table, and then your object, and it creates a table for you. That is so easy.
Yeah, I saw that in your example. You just called get process.
Yeah.
And boom, you have your object right there. And you can do that for any other kind of querying you wanted to do, kind of make it more dynamic and I guess automate more. You don't have to write 10 different email templates. You can kind of, write some PowerShell that queries whatever you're trying to add to the email and have it kind of do it that way. But I think you can also send attachments pretty easily.
Yeah, you can send attachments, any kind of them. You can set priorities on your emails. This is very important. Please reply. You can do list. You can do nested list. It's all so simple to do. What else?
Colors.
Yeah. You can definitely, you can style your content so much. You can do an underline, you can do bold, you can do italics, you can do strike throughs the text, and you can have pictures in your email, and basically any kind of component you can think of.
Yeah, and I think you were also mentioning that the way you leverage it, someone had a question about how to schedule things. And I think you incorporated this in a CI/CD pipeline so you can kind of account for all that kind of thing.
Yeah. So for scheduling emails, at least for my team, we use Azure DevOps as our CI/CD pipeline. And we just have this Mailazor script running on a schedule, and it sends out the emails by itself.
One thing I love about PowerShell and doing this podcast is finding those easy wins. the things where, oh, you just discovered this module, like import Excel is a pretty common one that people will pick up and be like, oh, wow, that's huge. This is another one of those modules where it's like pretty simple to use, but can do a ton for you very, very easily. Like I was seeing the code in your script. I was like, oh my gosh, like I can totally wrap my head around that. That is simple English, a lot of the commands and parameters. And okay, you need things colored and bolded and things like that. And it's just a different parameter. You get your collection of values for the params and you just run one line at the end. I think it's send email message is the command name.
Yeah, that's just like the old way you used to have this send mail message to from. It's the exact same thing, but using the new method.
And I think it only works with Microsoft Graph.
No, it works with POP3. Yeah, there's a bunch of ways that you can use it with. I used it mostly with Graph. Yeah, there's a bunch of ways. Yeah.
I think a lot of our listeners will be in that boat. So do you have to connect MG Graph before you run the command?
Yes. So you need an app registration on Azure, basically a service account in the cloud, and that account would need mail send permissions. So to be able to send email in the organization as whatever user they want to be. Once you have those permissions on the app, you just connect to Microsoft Graph using the client secret and the app ID, and you're all set.
Simple enough.
Well, yeah. I mean, once you have the credentials set up, it's just the same block of code that you have to run to connect to Microsoft Graph.
And if people want to get this module, how can they get it?
It's the simple way. It's the PowerShell way. Install module, name, Mailazar.
And that's Mailozurr, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, Mailozurr.
Yep.
Unique name.
Yes.
I don't know what the czar is.
Yeah, I have no clue what the name is for. Yeah.
But it's memorable.
Yeah. It slides off the tongue. Mailazar.
Yeah. It was cool to see Evotech has a bunch of really prolific PowerShell projects. They're one of those people who anything they touch is just great. They have more modules than I could cover in a PowerShell podcast episode.
Yeah.
That do big things.
So Mailazar, it uses PS Write HTML module on the back end. That's how the simple options like email table, email list comes from. And a lot of it is again extended into different modules, like I think Dashimo, Status Imo, and there's so many different modules that you can use to like generate dashboards or like status pages for your like infrastructure.
Yeah, it's cool. He has like a whole ecosystem of modules that kind of all tie in some way. It's pretty cool. I'll have to get him on the pod at some point. But I heard some great things about you and your career. You seem like a rising up and comer, first conference talk. Can you give me a little bit of background about sort of what led you to now be working with PowerShell? And I think you work at Align Technologies now.
Yeah, I have been working here for a year. I started as an intern last year in May. I was actually doing my master's in computer science at NC State. It's North Carolina State University, right, in Raleigh. And it was my summer break and I was looking for summer internships. And so I applied here for a cloud infrastructure intern role, and it was coincidentally under Michael Kanakis.
I've heard of him.
Yeah. So you'd figure how I got into PowerShell. I started like most people have, reading the book
PowerShell in the Month of
Lunches. Yeah. I still have that PDF on my computer. Yeah. So I started with that, and then when I actually started my internship, I started working on a bit of scripts here and there, and I just kept working on PowerShell, and then
You've done something right.
Yeah.
So when you were in school, did you hear about, and are you done with school or are you still in school?
I'm done with school.
Congrats on that.
Thank you.
Did you hear about PowerShell? Do you have was it like a computer science background? Did you use any other languages?
I have a computer science background. So actually I've done my undergrad in information technology. Okay. And that wasn't very different from computer science. It was just computer science without the hardware part of it. And so around third year of my undergrad engineering, I realized all of the languages are pretty much the same. Like the core of it is pretty much the same. They have loops, they have these data structures. Once you get a hold of it, you can like start coding in that. So I have programmed in a bunch of languages: JavaScript, Python, Java, C++. There were a lot of them, but I can't code right now. If you ask me to, I Google it every time.
Mm-hmm. Hey, that's the way to do it. But I think what you said earlier about understanding the similarities, the same constructs are present. You just need to figure out the exact words that whatever language uses for them. That's a pretty big realization to have. So it's awesome to hear that you had that. Do you have a favorite language?
Ooh, I would say it depends on the use case, but for the past year, it has been PowerShell. I've been in the Microsoft world a lot for the last year, and I've seen what PowerShell is able to do. PowerShell is able to do some things so simply, like just one commandlet or just one line of code, and the stuff that it's able to achieve with that simplicity is amazing. A lot of other languages are not able to do that. Like you need to have that basic 10-15 lines of code first to actually achieve anything out of it.
Yeah, that's a huge selling point for sure. I think that even if you compare PowerShell to .NET, which it's sort of built on top of, even still, to do a lot of the things in .NET, like an API request, you need a whole bunch of steps prior to it. Instead of just invoke REST method, boom, you're there. So the verbose nature of PowerShell, sometimes the command names can be kind of long. That didn't turn you off initially?
No, it felt like I'm reading English, which is good.
Yeah.
It's good. Use words.
Yes, exactly. Verb, noun. It's easy to wrap your head around that,
Yeah.
and it kind of makes sense most of the time. I think there are a couple Microsoft Graph commands that can make it a little long. I don't know if you've seen some of the longer ones. They're like several nouns connected together.
Yeah.
But I think that's just the nature of, I guess, the API. The Microsoft Graph API is pretty extensive. You can do, I guess, pretty much everything with it these days.
Yeah, I think so. I think you can do whatever you can do on the portal, but with the Graph API. Yeah.
That's fun. Have there been any things in PowerShell that you've seen and you're like, okay, this kind of sucks a little bit, or this is maybe a little rough around the edges?
I have to think about that one. I did write some scripts that did run for a very, very long time. The way I think I got around it was use generic list to speed that up. But that was .NET, I guess, .NET data structure, yeah.
I think they've actually just recently made an improvement to the way that the plus equals works in
Oh,
PowerShell, so
cool.
it's more performant now.
That's
I think
cool.
there's still use cases where using the list would be better, but yeah, I'm glad to see that, because anytime you can make your code readable, I'm a huge fan of, because
Yeah,
not
me
everyone's going to be able to decipher what's going on. They're not going to have years of experience with PowerShell or whatever the case may be. So I'm happy to see that. Are you on Windows PowerShell, PowerShell 7?
PowerShell 7.
What do you think about the cross-platform thing? Is that expected? Because I was just talking to someone else earlier about how I think people getting into PowerShell today may not appreciate how big of a deal it is for the PowerShell community to now have a cross-platform and open source tool that can work everywhere. Because back in the day, you were just locked Windows machines only. So you have this tool you're really passionate about, but the use case is a little bit more limited than an open source and cross-platform tool.
Yeah. When I first started with PowerShell, I was very impressed with how easy it is to use with anything in the Microsoft world, and to have it extended to other platforms and have the potential to have it that easy with other platforms too is super exciting. Yeah. So I feel great about it.
What about, so I know Mailazar is an awesome module. Do you have any other modules that you're a big fan of?
Import Excel. Working with Excel is so easy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What else?
I think working with PowerShell is easy.
Yeah.
Working with Excel is not easy, but working
Yeah.
with Import Excel makes working with Excel easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The way it gives me designed Excels right out of
That's
it.
the hugest
That's so
part.
cool.
I've never designed a pivot table in my life or done any of that other stuff. I'm always lost whenever I look at a nice Excel sheet, which is interesting because I was talking to a business executive, a CEO, and he was telling me that, back in the day, he went to school. He went to a class for a week just on Excel.
There's advanced courses on Excel.
Yeah. He said by the end of the course, they take away the mouse and all you can use is the shortcuts. So similar to how we're like passionate about PowerShell, businessy people are passionate about Excel. So we can meet them in the middle. We'll use similar to like Mailazar. We just write the PowerShell and you get something pretty at the end and we don't need to deal with all that funny business that can come with Excel.
Yeah, I agree.
Any other modules come to mind?
I'm a big fan of PowerShell Universal.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have this tool, a web app now, which started as a small project, but it kept growing and it's like a whole app now. And we were able to build so much through that one framework. It's amazing what it can do.
It really is. It's very expansive on what it can do.
Yeah.
Do you have any front end experience?
I do a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of front end. Sometimes I'm a little annoyed when people tell me to curve the table a little
Right,
bit.
yeah.
Like, I really don't want to write code for that, please.
Right? It works.
Yeah. But yeah, I do like designing things just if I am designing it.
Yeah. It's another one of those modules. It seems like there's a theme here where you just write PowerShell and you get something awesome on the other end and you don't have to fiddle with all the annoying pieces in between.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a very cool project. Shout out to Adam Driscoll. I just had him on the pod a few weeks ago. But is there any message you want to have for other people who are maybe earlier in their careers? Maybe they're thinking about submitting a conference talk and they haven't yet. Do you have any, now that you've gone through it, it was a success, you did it, you have any advice for them?
Rip the band-aid off. Till at least I did the talk, like even a minute ago, I was like, oh shit.
Yeah.
I don't know what I've signed up for. I kept telling my boyfriend, I was like, I have no clue what I've signed up for. This event keeps getting bigger. Like Mike would walk into the office and he'll be like, oh, we ordered food for everyone and we have like these fancy badges.
The
and I
badges
was
are
like,
amazing.
this event is legit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people with a lot of years of experience, a lot of passion for it. But in my opinion, it's really cool to see how supportive the community is.
Exactly. This community is, I have not seen one like it. Maybe I've not been to many, but up till now, I've not seen such a supportive community. They really do want like just regular PowerShell automators coming together, just sharing ideas. They really do just want that.
Yep. Even if you don't know everything about everything, because
Yeah.
nobody does,
Yeah.
but you find a problem, you solved it. We want to hear about how. We want to hear about the day-to-day struggles that you go through and, oh, actually there's a module for that. Because
Yeah.
there's so many modules out there. We don't know about all of them. I mean, I didn't know about Mailazar until today.
Oh, okay.
I genuinely
Yeah.
didn't. I mean, I haven't had the need to send emails in a while, but, well, at least in automated fashion like that. But, I'm thinking of some personal use cases where I can maybe automate some things using Mailazar.
That's the thing, when I started working here, before this I was always studying, but I started working here and then I realized if you want to come up with ideas, it's not going to pop in your head like out of nowhere. I need to like go talk to people and like listen to what they're doing, and I don't even know what to Google to like solve a problem. You first need to know what's possible out there to actually come up with ideas, and that's what this conference does and like the people here do.
Yeah, and it can end up in improving your career, but also saving you a ton of time.
Yeah.
I think there was somebody in the audience who mentioned that they, wrote a ton of HTML for their emails that they're sending out.
Yeah.
And now they don't have to anymore.
Yep.
Just from
Yep.
attending a conference, a community-oriented conference, not too expensive. They made new friends as well. It's awesome. I feel very fortunate to be part of this community. I kind of came up in this community, and they've done a ton for me and been supportive the whole way through. So, welcome.
Thank you.
And congrats. And thank you for joining me on the podcast. If people want to connect with you, where can they find you on the World Wide Web?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn?
I guess. Let me.
I'll have a
What's
link
my
to your
YouTube?
LinkedIn as well in the show notes.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So they can find me on LinkedIn.
And I'll have a link to your GitHub repository
Yes.
and a link to Mailazar. But just install module Mailazar, Mailozaurr, and you'll get started. Check out the help documentation. I think Evotech had a good blog post on it.
Yeah, he has 2 blog posts on it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll include a link to those as well. But thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you everybody out there for listening, and I'll let you get back to your pastries and celebrate an awesome session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.